As I mentioned to you at the beginning of the service, we are in part 2 this morning of this 5-part series I'm preaching called Chasing Carrots, the endless pursuit of more. This idea that we keep chasing after certain things, thinking that they're going to fulfill us, thinking that they're going to satisfy us, thinking that they're going to be the thing that, we're missing in life. Okay? And last week we talked about fame and notoriety and that desire that we have. And today, as we look at the second part of this, I want to talk about something that I believe impacts most of us in this room. At some point in our life, I believe that what I want to talk about today has impacted, if not everyone, at least most of us in this room. I know that it has impacted me and in my life. I want to talk about chasing after stuff, chasing after money, chasing after material possessions, chasing after the things that this world has to offer when it comes to material things, wealth and money. All right? Because I think that this is something that I know that we talk about it in churches a lot. We talk about the importance of being good stewards, if you will, of the things that God has given us. But I wonder sometimes if we address enough the heart attitude towards these things and the root cause of why we chase after these things. And so before we kind of dive into that, I need you to kind of help me out a little bit. I'm going to ask a couple questions. And I don't normally ask people to raise hands when I ask questions. I tend to keep things more rhetorical. But I'm going to ask you today to raise your hand when I ask a few questions if what I'm describing sounds like you. And I'm asking you to be as honest as possible. Okay? Just be honest with me, because I'm going to be honest with you. All right? So question 1, raise your hand if you would honestly say that you would not mind being rich, right? You would not mind being rich. You would not mind having a lot of money, right? I'm just being honest with you, right? Yeah, I see people shaking their heads like, yeah, that's no duh, right? Be honest. If you would not mind being rich, like you would not be upset if you got a phone call that said you had like a distant aunt that you've never met who died and left you $4 million, you're not going to get upset about that, right? You're probably going to be okay. So most of your hands went up. You wouldn't mind it, right? The idea of having more money than you would know what to do with, or more money than you need, right? Having enough money to do what you want to do, it's appealing to all of us, or at least most of us, right? You wouldn't mind it. All right, now second question. How many here know somebody who is rich, somebody who's extremely wealthy, and you look at the way in which they spend their money and live their life, and you think to yourself, if I was that rich, I would be a lot better at being rich than they are. You ever thought that before, right? Like they're stupid rich, I would be smart rich, right? Have you ever thought that? I know a few people that are like that, and I look at what they waste their money on, and I think, I would not waste my money on that. I'd waste it on this instead, right? Now, here's the last question. Be completely honest with me, all right? You were honest with the first one. How many here are really, really rich? Like you're loaded. Be honest. I'm talking money. You got more money than you know what to do with. I'm not talking like you're rich in the blessings of Jesus. Like that's the really Christian answer. I'm not looking for the really Christian answer. I know some of you want to give that, but I'm talking you're loaded. You got lots of money. Anybody here rich, like extremely wealthy? Maybe you are. I don't know. And I know it's a weird question to ask you, but I'm just asking to be honest. Like you're really rich. All right. I saw one hand go up, but then go back down. So I'm not, but most of us in the room would say, if someone were to ask us if we're really rich, most of us, if not all of us, would say, no, I am not really rich. You might say I have enough. You might say that I'm not starving, but you wouldn't say that you're rich, right? That you're extremely wealthy, right? And I think that is an honest thing. I think, because here's what I know about people, about you and about me. Most of us would like to be rich, but most of us would agree that we're not, right? We'd like to be. We'd like to have more money. We would like to be more wealthy. We wouldn't mind it. I'm not talking about, being greedy and like trying to achieve things through, malicious ways or nefarious ways. I'm not saying any of that. I'm just saying that what I know to be true about most people is that we would like to be more rich than we are, and that most of us would agree that we're not very rich, right? That's where most people are. And unfortunately for many, this desire, right, this desire to want to be rich and yet to think that we're not really rich yet, has produced an attitude that causes us to pursue, to long after, to even lust after more. right? This idea that I just need a little bit more, right? I might have a good amount, but I just need a little bit more. If I could just have just a little bit more, if I just, not a lot, just a little bit more, then I will feel like I have enough. Then I will feel like I'm where I need to be. And so there's a lot of research out there about this topic of people and what they think is rich or what they would do to be rich. And so there's this magazine article that was written that asked people what they would do to have $5 million, right? Like, what would you do for $5 million? I could ask you the question. Maybe you're thinking in your head some things you would do for $5 million. Most people would not say, I don't want $5 million. There are some that would say that, but most people would not. And so they asked the question, what would you do for $5 million? And one of the things, according to the article that I found was interesting, is that 54% of people said that they would listen to country music for the rest of their lives. Now, I don't know, maybe people hate country music more than I thought they did. I didn't think country music was all that bad, but for some people that would be like agony, and they would listen to it for the rest of their lives for $5 million. Well, that's sort of a no-brainer. I will honky-tonk all the way around town for $5 million, right? But that's what some people said. 42%, listen to this one, said that they would have all of their teeth removed for $5 million. 42% would have all their teeth removed. I guess with $5 million, you can buy new ones, but that's what they would do. They would have them all removed for $5 million. Now, this is the saddest one I read. 50% of the people who were asked this question, what they would do for $5 million, 50% said they would be okay with if one random person on the planet would die. If one random person on the planet had to die for them to get $5 million, they were okay with that. As long as they didn't know the person, they were okay with that person dying for them to have $5 million. That is shockingly sad, in my opinion. Right? And then 24% said that they would be willing to live in solitude for 20 years. They would live in complete and total solitude for 20 years for $5 million. They would spend 20 years completely isolated away from everybody in order to have $5 million. A fourth of the people who were polled. That tells us something. That tells us a little bit about where our heads are as a society and as a culture when it comes to this idea that if I could just get a little bit more, what I'd be willing to give up, what I'd be willing to do for a little bit more. Gallup did a poll, and they interviewed people, and they asked them, how do you know if you're rich? Like, what do you consider to be a certain amount of money that would indicate that you are a rich person, right? And so what the poll found was that depending on your income bracket, obviously your number would change, right? So they asked people who made $30,000 a year as a household income, okay? $30,000 a year. And they said for them to feel as though they were rich, they would need to make $74,000 a year, okay? $74,000 a year. Over double their income, right? To be rich. Now, some of you in this room, you're there already. Right? I don't know your financial situations, but I would imagine that some of you in this room, your combined household income is already at or above that $74,000 a year bracket. And you're probably thinking to yourself, I would say that, $74,000, that's where I'm at, and it doesn't feel all that rich, right? Because where you're at, that doesn't seem all that rich, but to somebody making $30,000 a year, that to them seems rich. Then they asked someone who made $50,000. They said, if I could make $100,000 a year, I would feel like I'm rich. Double their income. $100,000 a year, I would feel rich. And again, there's some maybe in this room who you're real close to that if you're not there. And you're like, I got news for you. That doesn't feel real rich to me. And then when they got into those that were well into the six figures, I'm talking hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. Even $1 million a year. And they asked them what they would need to make to be considered rich. And the average answer was they would need to have at least $5 million in assets to feel as though they were rich. So if you're the poor sap with only $3 million, you don't feel very rich. You need 5. Right? And so what I know about this to be true is that we don't feel rich, but we want to be. And when we define as rich is really a moving number. It's a moving target. It's a line that fluctuates depending on our current situation, our current circumstances, what our background is, and what we hope to achieve. That idea of what it means to be rich is going to float. I bet some of you in this room, like me, I did this when I was younger. When Caitlin and I were in our 20s and we were married, 21, we used to tell ourselves, when we would sit down and talk about our finances, we would say, if we could just, when we get to this point with our income, right? When we're making this much money, we're going to feel like we're comfortable, right? Like if we can just work for a few years and see some raises and save some money, if we could get to this point, we'll feel like we're rich, or at the very least that we have more than enough, right? And you know what happened, and what I imagine happens to everyone who's ever thought this. You get to that line. In fact, you cross that line, and what happens? The line moves. Right? The line moves. Who here knows what I'm talking about? Can you relate? Okay. The line moves. And so then you set a new line. You say, okay, well, times have changed. Things are more expensive. If I can just get to this line, if I can just get to this point, then I'll have enough, and I'll be rich. And then you meet that line, and guess what? The line moves again. And it keeps moving. And that's this idea of chasing carrots, this pursuit of more, that no matter what happens, every time and this is true of human beings, is that when we get to that point that we initially thought would be the place that's going to satisfy, the place that was going to be enough, but as soon as we get there, the line moves. And we aren't satisfied anymore. It's not enough anymore. What do you need to be happy? What do you need to be happy? What do you need to feel rich, to be satisfied in life? If you ask that question, most people would say, I'm not sure what I need to feel fully complete and satisfied, but I know this to be true. I just need a little bit more. Right? If you ask someone what they need to be satisfied, to be rich, they would say, I don't know, but I know it's a little bit more than what I have right now. That's what most people would say. That's where we are. And this is why in the scripture we see Jesus talk so much about this. This having a right perspective when it comes to stuff and things and money. Jesus warns us about money more than just about anything else that he warns about in all of Scripture. Because he recognizes the danger to our lives, spiritually speaking, emotionally speaking, mentally, physically, the danger that a wrong perspective about money can have in our lives. In fact, he said to a group of people once in Luke 12:15, he said, beware. Beware. You don't see Jesus use this term very often. This like beware. Then he says guard against, or he'll say be on guard. It's like he's giving a double warning. He's saying beware, be on guard. He's like telling them twice here. Like what I'm talking about is extremely dangerous. He says guard against every kind of greed. Life is not measured by how much you own. Guard yourself against every kind of greed, because life is not measured by how much you own. He says, watch out, be on guard. Your life, the quality of your life, is more than the abundance or the volume of your stuff. The quality of your life is about more than the volume of your stuff. It's a warning. Be on guard. You have to be very, very careful, because we have a culture that is screaming and shouting and telling us all the time that you just need more. You just need more. You need this. You need that. What's missing? This is what's missing. Get this in your life and it won't be missing anymore. Culture is shouting that in our ears over and over and over again, that we just need a little bit more, and then we'll be happy. I've seen teenagers with smartphones in school. They'll pull out their smartphones and they'll have like a competition, like, what smartphone do you have? Well, I have an iPhone 8. Well, I've got an iPhone X, right? As if somehow the $850 phone isn't as good as the $1,000 phone, right? And it's like a status symbol, that if you don't have the most expensive, the newest, that somehow you are a lower class person, right? And we would like to think that, that's with the rise of technology. No, it's been that way even when I was in school. I remember a time, I was in junior high. I believe I was in 7th grade maybe. And I was always someone who I liked to wear name brand clothing, right? Now, I was spoiled in the fact that I always had name brand clothing, but I liked to wear name brand clothing. And I remember one time, I don't know how this happened, but I had this pair of black denim shorts, because that was when black denim was still popular, all right? I had these black denim shorts, And they were from Walmart. They were a brand, they weren't a name brand. And I wore them to school. And I remember a kid, I'll never forget it. I'm not going to say his name. But he comes up to me and he goes, "Where'd you get those shorts?" Because like, as if something was wrong with me. Like I had leprosy or something, right? And I remember I flat out lied to this kid. I was like, "Oh, my friend left these at my house. I wore them by accident." And you know what he said to me? He goes, "I was wondering because I didn't think you were someone who would wear anything like that." That's what he said to me. "I didn't think you would wear those kinds of clothes." And I was like, I lied to this kid. I was like 12 or 13. I lied to this kid because I was afraid that if he knew that I wore a pair of shorts from Walmart, that somehow I was going to be less cool or less popular or a second-class student, right? There's this thing within us that causes us, even as adults, to kind of do the same thing, right? We have this idea that, if you really love someone, you'll buy them the biggest diamond you can find, right? True love is based on the number of carats in that stone on that ring, right? And so people will look at let me see your ring, let me see your ring. And if the ring's really big, then, he must really think you're special, right? And so it's not just a teenager thing, it's an adult thing. We all do this. We all have this idea that the quality of our life is wrapped up in the abundance or the richness of the things that we have. We have people that will never invite anyone to their home because they don't think their home is big and grand enough. We have people who will go out and spend money on cars that they can't afford so they can fit in with those that they work with, those that they live around, those that they socialize with. So they're not driving around in a jalopy. That's what we do. Because we think we need more. And Jesus says, no. Your life, the quality of your life is not measured in the abundance of your stuff. It's measured in something much greater. He goes on to tell this parable about a rich young man. And if you know this story, in this story, this man comes to Jesus and he says, "What do I have to do to be saved? To be a follower of you?" And he goes through and he lists some of the commandments, if you remember this parable. And the young man feels pretty good about himself. And he says, "Well, I've never done this. I've never done that. I've always respected my parents. I've always done the right thing. I followed the commandments." And he thinks to himself, "I must be saved." And Jesus says that while you've done all these things, there's one thing that you still lack. He says, "Go sell all of your possessions and then come back and follow me." And the Bible says that the young man walked away with his head hanging low, disheartened because he was unable to do so. And then he goes on to tell his disciples in Luke 12, 16, 19. All right? Oh, I'm sorry. No. I got ahead of myself here. So he tells them this story about this man who walked away unhappy because he did not have the ability to give up what he had. And that is how many of us are today. We want to follow God. We want to follow Jesus. We want to be a follower of him. Yet we're not willing oftentimes to give up the things that he asks of us because we are so attached to our stuff. Then he goes on to tell another story. Talked about a man who was building he had a farm. He had this farm, and in this farm he had all of this stuff. His farm had grown a lot of produce, had done really well for himself. And this is what he says in Luke 12, 16 through 19. Then he told him this story. A rich man had a fertile farm that produced fine crops. He said to himself, "What should I do? I don't have room for all my crops." Then he said, "I know, I'll tear down my barns and build bigger ones. Then I'll have room enough to store all my wheat and other goods. And I'll sit back and say to myself, 'My friend, you have enough stored away for years to come. Now take it easy, eat, drink, and be merry.'" So we see this guy who he has more than enough. And there's a part of this parable that I want you to understand, is that in order for this man to be rich, who had to bless him? God. He was a farmer. His wealth was tied in whether or not the rains came, whether or not his plants had optimal growing conditions, whether or not things went exactly as they needed to. So God blesses him with wealth. So we have this idea sometimes in the church that God despises wealth, that we shouldn't want to be wealthy, that we shouldn't have money, that we shouldn't have things. That's not true. The problem isn't wealth. The problem isn't being rich. God doesn't have a problem with a person being wealthy. He blessed this man to be wealthy. The problem wasn't that he was wealthy. The problem is what he did with his wealth. He thought that he would just build bigger barns, tore down perfectly good ones, build bigger ones to store even more, and then just sit back, relax, and do nothing, and enjoy his life, and enjoy what he had. But look at what his response was in Luke 12:20-21. But God said to him, "You fool, you will die this very night. Then who will get everything you worked for? Yes, a person is a fool who will store up earthly wealth, but not have a rich relationship with God." A person is a fool who will store up earthly wealth, but not have a rich relationship with God. God did not have a problem with him being rich. The problem is that he wasn't rich towards God. The problem was that he was not rich toward God. He was only rich in the things of this world. He missed being rich in the things that mattered most. And with that in mind, I want to tell you some good news and some bad news. Okay? I have good news for you, and I have bad news for you. We'll start with the good news. The good news is, now pay attention to this, this is the good news. Ready for it? You are rich. That's the good news. You are rich. Now, I know you're thinking to yourself right now, but I just said I'm not rich. I asked you if you thought you're rich, and you didn't put your hands up. At the end of the month, I've got more bills than I have money. I don't feel very rich. The good news is you're rich. You are rich. You just don't feel rich. You're rich, but you don't feel rich. When we get a little perspective here and we realize that roughly 3 billion people on this planet will live on $2 or less a day. $2 less a day. 3 billion people on this planet live on less than $2 a day. Some of you spend that on a coffee every day, or more than that on a coffee every day on your way to work. $2 a day. We are rich. You know how you can tell how rich we are? You can tell if a person's rich by what bothers us, by the things that annoy us. That's how you can tell when someone's rich, right? Like when you get mad because you ordered something on Amazon and it wasn't a prime item, so instead of getting it in 2 days, it's going to take 5 days, right? You get irritated because you got to wait 3 more days. Right? That's a rich person problem. That's a rich person problem. Or how about you order fast food, right? And they only gave you 1 barbecue sauce for the chicken nuggets that somebody else cooked for you instead of 3 like you wanted. That's a rich person problem, right? Or your Wi-Fi isn't working at home, so you can't binge watch Netflix like you had planned on. That's a rich person problem, right? Your cable goes out for a couple of hours. Your power goes out for a few hours, and your house might get a little bit hot because your air conditioning can't run. That's a rich person problem. Or your hands-free calling doesn't work on your $30,000+ vehicle, and so you actually have to hold your phone to your ear to talk to somebody, and that annoys you. That's a rich person problem. You can tell how rich we are by the things that annoy us, by the things that bother us. I mean, if you drive a car, that puts you in the top 15% of the most wealthiest people on the planet. You know that? If you own at least one vehicle, at least one, and most people in this room own more than one, 2, maybe 3, some of you maybe 4, right? If you own one vehicle in your house, that puts you in the top 15% wealthiest people in the world, right? When you and I get hungry and we can get in a car and we can drive past 10, 15, 20, 30 different places to choose where we want to eat. And then we can go to that place where they're going to seat us. They're going to take our order. They're going to prepare and cook our meal. They're going to serve us. And they're going to clean up our mess when we leave. And then we complain because it took 7 minutes longer than it should have, or because it wasn't quite as hot as I wanted it to be, or because the picture in the menu doesn't look like the picture on my plate. That's a rich person problem. That's a rich person problem. We are rich. We are so rich. We don't feel like it. And I'm not trying to diminish for a second the reality that some of us are in. The reality that some of us, some of you maybe, times are tight, times are tough. You got medical bills you don't know how you're going to pay, right? You have demands on your finances that you didn't expect to have. You have debt, whether it's your fault or not, that you're in, that you're trying to climb out of. I get that. I'm not trying to diminish that, but the fact is that most of us in this room, we're doing okay. Doing okay. We're pretty rich. And the fact is we need to acknowledge that God has blessed us immensely, that God has blessed us in incredibly rich ways. The reason we don't feel rich is because we don't acknowledge how rich we are. We need to acknowledge what God has given us. And that compared to most people in the world, we are very, very rich. And then we need to do something about that. We need to be good at being rich. We need to acknowledge that we are rich, and we need to be good at being rich. We need to be rich in ways that honor God. So we've got to be good at it. But first we have to acknowledge it. We have to acknowledge it. Don't leave this place this morning without acknowledging how rich you are today. It will change your whole perspective about money and about stuff. And this is weird for some of you to admit that you're rich, because there's something that almost seems like unchristian about admitting that we're rich. Ecclesiastes 5:19 says, "And it is a good thing to receive wealth from God, and the good health to enjoy it. To enjoy your work and accept your lot in life, this is indeed a gift from God." Recognize that God has allowed you and I to be born into a country that has provided opportunity to us that very few people in the world, if you look at the global population, the opportunity that you and I have had in this country, very few people have had. Recognize that. Recognize that God has blessed us that way. And it's okay to admit it. It's okay to admit that God has blessed you and that you're rich and that I am rich. Enjoy God's blessings. Be rich. But there's also bad news. The good news is you're rich. The bad news is, ready for it? You're rich. You're rich. But I thought that was the good news. It is the good news. But the bad news is you're rich. It can also be really, really bad news to be rich. Because when you are rich, you are at a spiritual disadvantage when you're rich. A spiritual disadvantage when you're rich. Whether you want to agree with that statement or not, that's fine. But look at what Jesus said. I mentioned to you earlier this story about the rich young man who came to Jesus, who walked away because he was unwilling to give up his stuff. Look at what Jesus said in Luke 18:24-25. When Jesus saw this, he said, "How hard it is for the rich to enter the kingdom of God. In fact, it is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich person to enter the kingdom of God." When you're rich, you are at a significant spiritual disadvantage. It's a blessing, but it also leaves us at a disadvantage. It can hinder us spiritually when we're rich. Why? Because we already have a roof over our head. We already have a roof over our head. We already have clothes on our body. We already have a place to lay our head at night that is safe and secure out of the elements. In fact, I would venture to guess that there's probably no one in this room, maybe, I'm guessing that no one in this room, who at least in recent years has ever had the privilege of praying for your daily bread, because you didn't have to worry about whether or not God would provide your daily needs, because we have pantries stocked full of food at home. When's the last time you had to pray for your daily bread? That you had to pray that today, God, I don't think I'll eat unless you provide something today. Now, I know some of you have been there. I know that from talking to you. But most of us in recent years have either never been there, or it's been a long time since we've been there. But we didn't know where it was going to come from. And when you don't have and I call that a privilege, because when you don't have the privilege of praying for God to meet your daily need, and I mean it, like your daily need, then we lose something in our intimacy with God. There is a certain level of intimacy with God that takes place when a person is so dependent upon Him that they literally have to live day by day praying that He will provide. Praying that somehow they'll get the medical care that they need. Somehow they'll have food in their stomach. Somehow God will make a way for them to have a roof over their head that night. Somehow God will keep somebody from robbing them and breaking into their shelter, breaking into their tent and stealing what little they have. When you're rich, you miss that. It's a blessing, but it's also a spiritual disadvantage, because we are lacking in intimacy with God because we don't depend upon Him enough. When things are going easy and we have all that we need, it's not that we don't believe, it's not that we reject, but let's be honest. We're not as dependent on Him. We're not. We may love Him, we may pray, we may read our Bibles, we may have a relationship with Him, but that relationship is different. You go to another country where people have nothing, and you will see a couple of things if they're believers. Number one, you will see a joy that makes no sense to you, because you look at what little they have, yet they have joy. And you will see an intimacy with God that you will become jealous of. Because they know God in a way that you and I probably don't. Because we don't have the same needs. So being rich is also bad news. Leads us to the spiritual disadvantage. Another reason why being rich leaves us at a disadvantage. Number one, is because we aren't as dependent upon God. Number two, because as it is said, to whom much is given, much is required. This is a disadvantage being rich because to whom much is given, much is required. It's great that we're blessed, but guess what? God expects more from us because we're rich. Because we have more, because we have so much, God expects more from us. It's just facts. He expects more from us. We have a greater responsibility because we are rich. And all the time we're rich, every moment of the day, culture is shouting out to us that what you don't have is what you need. What you're missing is this thing. We need the car. We need the fancy house. We need the fancy clothes. We need, the fancy countertops. We need the great remodels in our homes. We need to have the perfect lawn. We need to have all the stuff to make that happen. Don't even get me started on vacation, right? That somehow you can't live life unless you go on vacation every year, sometimes 2 or 3. That's what culture's shouting in our ear. And all the while God is saying, I've blessed you, but I expect more from you now. And we're living as if we're poor. We're living as if we're not rich. And we all admit we don't feel rich. And so we live our lives in a way to try to make us feel like maybe we are by buying things we can't afford, by going places we shouldn't be going, doing things. And listen, there's nothing wrong with buying nice things and going on trips. Again, enjoy the blessing, but recognize that it's also a responsibility. Enjoy your blessings, but recognize the responsibility that we have because we're rich. Because what you don't have is what you need. That's what we're taught. But Jesus says, no, be on guard. Be on guard. The abundance and the quality of your life is not measured in the abundance of what you have. It is not measured in the volume of your stuff. And here's what I know to be true about you because I know that it's true about me. We know that in our heads. Like what I just said, most of you are not sitting here thinking that's the first I've ever heard that. We know that in our heads. We live lifestyles that are very different from what we know to be true in our head. We live lifestyles that do not reflect that truth. They don't reflect that truth. And if you're really, really honest, you might say, yeah, I'm spending more than I make. Or you might say, yeah, I'm not being as generous towards God because I'm spending most of it on myself. If you're really, really honest, you probably recognize some of that. I'm not being as rich towards God. I'm not being as generous towards God in the things that I should be rich towards and giving to the things that matter most. Storing up those treasures in heaven, if you will. Because I'm spending most of my money on myself. Or I'm spending more money than I make. I'm spending more than I should. I'm not being responsible. I'm being a good steward of what I have. If we're really honest with ourselves, some of us might admit to that. Why? Because we've bought into the lie that more stuff equals happiness. That the more stuff we have, that's what really matters. If I could just get that thing, then I'll finally be happy. That's why we do it. Here's what we have to understand. Whenever we believe that lie, and it comes at us all the time. Whenever we believe that lie, it comes at us all the time, every day, in every way. When we believe that lie, we are under the curse of money. When we think that we just need more things, more stuff, that's what truly matters. That's what's truly going to bless me and be happy. We are under the curse of money. We have to recognize that we are under the curse of money. You may be under the curse of money today. You may be. I can't answer that question. You may be under the curse of money today. Whenever we believe that our problems can be solved by more stuff, we're under the curse of money. What I hope this morning is that you'll understand that more money isn't going to fix anything. More money is not going to keep our kids off drugs. If anything, more money has shown that they're more susceptible to getting on drugs. More money isn't going to heal our sick relative of cancer. More money is not going to save a marriage. More money is not going to make depression go away. More money is not the answer. We don't need more of what's temporary. We don't need more of what's temporary. We need more of what's eternal, more of what will last. Storing up those treasures in heaven that will never decay. That's what we need more of. What we don't need is more money. What we don't need is more stuff. What we need is more Jesus. We need more Jesus. I don't know about you, but I don't want to be under the curse of money. I don't want to be under the power of anything that belongs to this world. I want to be under the power of the Holy Spirit. I want to have my life attuned to the eternal Word of God. That's what I want. I want to live a life that truly honors God. And you and I cannot do that living under the curse of money. You and I cannot do that when we're consistently and perpetually chasing after more. Chasing carrots. Things that won't satisfy, things that won't last. So I encourage you this morning to just examine yourself. Ask yourself where your heart is, because all of us can get here. We can all find ourselves under this curse of money, under the power of its influence. Be under the power of God. Don't be under the power of something temporary, be under the power of something eternal. Stop chasing carrots. Chase after what matters most. Amen?